Hey guys, in this lesson, I'm going to cover the Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, which is a service in which we can run Docker containers on AWS. So let's have a look at ECS and the various components that make up this service. So one of the most important ones is we get to deploy something called an ECS cluster. So we always have to create a cluster and then we can start looking at the various other components. So we have a cluster, and that is a logical grouping of tasks or services. Within the cluster, we can then launch our tasks. And a task is a running Docker container. So we don't just call it a container. In ECS, we call it a task. The task comes from a task definition. That's a very important component. We have to create a task definition that defines what it is we want to run. You can see this fairly simple container definition here. The name is WordPress. So WordPress is the image that we're going to pull down. It's going to be a task that runs a WordPress website. And it has a link to another container, which is a MySQL container. So that's where the database layer is going to be. We can see what the container port is. This is a website running on port 80, and how much memory and CPU we want to assign to this particular task. So the definition of the task is defined in the task definition. And then when we launch a task, it's going to utilize that. Now, of course, there has to be an image. So the task definition actually defines what image we want to pull, the WordPress image in this case. The image is stored in a registry, such as the Amazon Elastic Container Registry. So when we start up our task, it's going to pull the image from the Elastic Container Registry based on what's defined in the task definition. So we can store our tasks in ECR. Also, they can also be in other repositories like Docker Hub as well. Now we can then deploy something called an ECS service. An ECS service is used to maintain a desired count of tasks. So it's a bit like auto-scaling with Amazon EC2, where we can say we want a certain number of tasks to be running. I always want to have 10 tasks running, for example, and it's going to make sure that it maintains that count of tasks. Now there's a concept called an ECS container instance. And depending on how we're utilizing ECS, this either exists or it doesn't. It doesn't when we're using something called AWS Fargate. We'll go into the details shortly, but that's a serverless service, which means we're not managing any of the underlying infrastructure. If we're not using Fargate, we're using something called the EC2 launch type. And with that, we're actually deploying EC2 instances into our AWS account. And those instances must have the ECS container agent running, and then we join them to the cluster. Those EC2 instances then become the hosts on which the tasks are going to run, and we have to manage those instances. We can then add auto-scaling for those container instances themselves. So the ECS service is essentially the auto-scaling for the tasks. And then Amazon EC2 auto-scaling is being utilized for the ECS container instances. So let's have a look at some key features. We've got a serverless option with AWS Fargate. That means you don't have to manage any of those ECS container instances yourself. It's managed for you and it's fully scalable. It provides fully managed container orchestration, so the control plane is managed for you with ECS. There's Docker support, so you can run and manage Docker containers with integration into the Docker Compose command line interface. There's also Windows container support as well. ECS has integration into Elastic Load Balancing, so we can distribute traffic using ALBs and NLBs. These are defined as part of the service. So when you create a service within ECS, you can define a load balancer. There's another service from ECS called ECS Anywhere, which enables you to utilize the ECS control plane with on-premises implementations. So the core components of ECS are these. We've got the cluster. That's the logical grouping of tasks or services. We've got the container instance, only relevant if you are actually utilizing the EC2 launch type rather than the serverless Fargate launch type. Here it's EC2 instances running the ECS agent in your account. Then there's the task definition. This is the blueprint that describes how a Docker container should actually launch. The task is the running container based on the settings in a task definition, and it needs to pull an image from ECR or Docker Hub, for example, which is the image that's referenced in that task definition. And then lastly, we have the service, which defines long-running tasks and enables us to define a task count or use auto-scaling, and also to attach Elastic Load Balancers as well. A bit more detail now on ECS images. So containers are created from a read-only template called an image, and that has the instructions for creating the Docker container. Those images are built from a Docker file, and only Docker containers are actually supported on ECS. Images are then stored in a registry such as Docker Hub or Amazon Elastic Container Registry. And ECR is a managed Docker registry service that's secure, reliable, and scalable. ECR also supports private Docker repositories with resource-based permissions using IAM in order to access those repositories and the images within them. You can also use the Docker CLI to push, pull, and manage your container images. Moving on, back to tasks and task definitions. So the task definition is required to run Docker containers in Amazon ECS, and it's a text file written in JSON format that describes one or more containers up to a maximum of 10. Task definitions use Docker images to launch the containers, and the image name is referenced within the task definition itself. The two different launch types are EC2 and Fargate. Very important to understand the differences between these. There's quite an impact in terms of what your costs are going to be, how you manage your infrastructure on ECS. So firstly, we have the EC2 cluster. This supports registries including ECR, Docker Hub, and self-hosted. For the EC2 launch type, you explicitly provision EC2 instances into your account. They have the container agent installed, they need to have the right permissions for ECS, and you need to join them to the cluster. You're then responsible for managing those EC2 instances, and you're charged per running EC2 instance. So you don't get charged with the number of tasks running on the instance, you're just charged for the instance itself. So you've got to work out there whether that's more cost effective compared to the Fargate launch type. It supports EFS, FSX, and EBS integration for storage, so quite a few storage options there. And you're going to handle all the cluster optimization. So for example, scaling the container instances. But you get more granular control here over your infrastructure. We then have the Fargate launch type. This supports ECR and Docker Hub for registries. With the Fargate launch type, it automatically provisions the resources for you. Fargate provisions and manages the compute, and you're charged for the running tasks. So it's a per task charge this time instead. It only supports EFS for integration. And Fargate will handle all the cluster optimization for you. So this is a serverless service. As you might expect with a serverless service, of course, you have less control. So here you have to weigh up the two different types of launch type and work out which is best for your particular use case. We need to provide permissions to our container instances and our tasks. For the container instance, we can attach an instance IAM role. The container instance IAM role provides permissions to the host. And here's an example of a managed policy that you can utilize to create this role. So this provides some permissions to ECS. So it means that the EC2 instance that runs the container agent is able to then access the ECS service. Then we need to supply permissions to our tasks. For that, we can utilize a task IAM role. This provides permissions to the container itself. Now it's important to note that with the Fargate launch type, the container instance role is replaced with a task execution role, which provides the permissions to execute the task. But we still need to use the task IAM role in order to provide the permissions to the task if that task needs to access other AWS services like S3, for example, or a DynamoDB table.